Okay, so topic, whatever we're up to, regulation, which is about business, government, and the Constitution. Rules and regulations the government puts in place for businesses. So what's our deal here? We want to start by looking at some theory, and then we're going to try to apply it in the real world. I already talked about one part of this, and that is antitrust. Antitrust is about regulation of competition. We're not going to talk about that much now because we already talked about it a lot, but when we talk about government regulation of business, antitrust competition policy is part of that. So we've already talked about what an externality is a long time ago, but it never hurts to remind ourselves about these things. An externality is sometimes also called an external cost or an external benefit. An externality occurs when a transaction creates a benefit, either which is a positive, or a cost, which is a negative, for someone not involved in the transaction. You go to class, you were at the gym, you decide not to shower, you're all smelly. You save yourself some time and trouble by getting to class on time. The people who have to sit next to you pay a cost for you being there. That's an externality. So what we get, again, is in a normal market, we see buyers and sellers. The buyer pays a cost, gets a benefit. That's a private benefit. It accrues only to them, the buyer. The store paid a cost to get that product and gets a benefit from selling it. They also have private costs and private benefits that are involved in this. So when a transaction happens, when you go to the grocery store and you buy something, buy beef, buy milk, buy vegetables, buy canned something, there's costs and benefits to you, there's costs and benefits to the store, but those are private benefits. Those are costs and benefits that are private to us, the buyer and seller. So let's suppose, though, that while we're making that product, that beef or that canned food or whatever, the factory that we made it in is polluting the air, dumping stuff into the water. We have created a social cost. Somebody's going to have to pay for that pollution. Somebody's going to pay because the air's polluted. Somebody's going to pay either because they have to clean up the river or because the fish die or something bad happens. There's a cost to society from that factory putting stuff in the air and putting stuff in the water, and those are not paid by the buyer or the seller. So if this is a meat packing plant and it creates a lot of air pollution and water pollution and industrial waste and all this other stuff, society has to deal with all that cost. The buyer and the seller don't. So we can have positive externalities. If the school district builds an elementary school near my house, the value of my house is going to go up. There's big vacant land right next to my house. If the school district were to buy that and put an elementary school there, that makes my house more valuable. Young couples want to live near to the elementary school where their kid goes. That will add value to my house. That's a positive externality. If, on the other hand, they build a high school on that piece of ground, people don't want to live near high schools. High school students, evil. People don't want to live near them. So if they build a high school on that piece of ground, the value of my house will go down. That's a negative externality. So to summarize, externalities create a divergence of private and social cost. They create a divergence of private and social cost. Parks are a positive externality. If everybody who benefited when a park is created, paid some of that benefit to the county, we could build more parks and we'd have more parks. We don't get enough parks because the people who benefit don't have to pay for the park. We get too much pollution because the people who benefit from the pollution, think of that beef packing plant, they get to pollute all the environment around them. The buyer of the beef doesn't have to pay a cost for that. The company doesn't have to pay a cost for that. If we made the buyer of the beef pay for cleaning up the river, the price of the beef would go way up. We'd sell less beef. So there's too much of things that are produced when there's negative externalities, and there's too little of things produced when there's positive externalities. So goods that create pollution, there's too much of them because the people who have to pay for the pollution are not the people who bought the goods. Two guys who told us what to do if you have an externality. The first of these dudes is a guy named A.C. Pigou, and the idea of externalities is in Adam Smith, right? It's 200 plus years old. He didn't use the word. The person who really starts using that term and starts getting us really involved in this is this guy, A.C. Pigou, British guy, another British guy in this whole mess. So how do we deal with externalities? Pigou's answer is that you use a tax system or you subsidize, which means what? It means either A, we tax that factory that's polluting, or we tax the people who benefit from the park, and in doing that, they are going to start to match the social cost with the private cost. If we tax the factory that's producing the pollution, then the buyers of the beef that's made in that factory are going to have to pay higher prices for the beef, and we tend to balance out the private cost and the social cost. The other way to do it is to subsidize, and that means if you want more of something, if you want somebody to do more of something, you pay them. If there's a social benefit to building parks, then you can encourage the developer of a community to build a park. When they're building houses, you can give them some money, give them a government benefit if they build a park, subsidize them. So to Pigou, the government needs to go in and resolve externalities. The other guy involved in this is this guy, Ronald Coase. When he first came out with his theory, lots of people on the left and the right just told him he was wrong. Over time, people began to see that maybe he was right, but, and I don't mean right in the right sense, but he's a much bigger player in the conservative view of the world than in the liberal view of the world. What he said is, yes, externalities are market failure, right? That's why Pigou thinks the government needs to be involved in externalities, is because the market doesn't resolve them correctly. What Pigou says is you need the parties involved to negotiate. That, let's say that you have a farmer and a rancher, right? Here's the classic Coase example. You have a rancher and a farmer, and the rancher's cows keep walking over onto the farm and eating the farmer's crops. And there we have a problem. We have an externality, the farmer and the rancher. Pigou would say, you should tax the rancher, and the government should build a fence to keep the cows out of the farm. Coase says, well, wait a second. Maybe the best thing here would be for the rancher to buy out the farmer and just let the cows use the whole land. Maybe the best thing here is for the rancher to pay the farmer to grow stuff and let the cows eat it. Maybe the best solution for this isn't for the government to decide what the best solution is. Maybe the best solution is for the two parties to get together and figure out the answer themselves. Now, the problem with this is that it requires what we call zero transaction costs. And in fact, Coase himself later in life said, really, his theory should have been about transaction costs, and everybody should have jumped on the transaction cost question when in fact they ignored it. But that being aside, let's say that a steel mill in Ohio is creating air pollution, which is getting turned into acid rain, and acid rain is falling on a forest in Canada and disturbing the forest, killing trees, killing fish in lakes. Okay? How do the dead fish negotiate? How does Canada prove that that factory in Ohio is the place where the acid rain's coming from? It's so complicated sometimes. These issues are so complex that there's no way to effectively trace them back, and we can't find the answer. There's a transaction cost. If you want to make a contract to resolve this issue, which is what Coase wants you to do, you have to be able to figure out who the parties are. You have to negotiate it. In many cases, it's obviously just too complex to make that happen, right? We've saved the whales largely because we got all the countries together that did whaling and we negotiated. That's perfect answer to Coase. But very often we can't identify the parties, we can't get them together, we can't figure out solutions that work. So again, quick summary. Positive externalities, we don't get enough of those. Parks. We benefit from parks. Everybody benefits from the park. Negative externalities like pollution, we get too much of those because, again, we can't tie the costs to the benefits, the private to the social. Secondhand smoke is a perfect example of a negative externality. How do you stop, right? If you sit there in a bar and you breathe other people's smoke, it can make you just as sick as if you were smoking yourself. That's a negative externality. The way we choose to deal with that has been no smoking sections, no smoking rules in certain kinds of bars and restaurants and so on. But it hasn't been negotiation of the parties. It hasn't been, imagine at a bar if you had to go ask the people not to smoke who are smoking and everybody's had too many beers. It's not going to work. You need government intervention to make the market work correctly.